Hey everyone, and welcome to the DualShockers ShockCast. My name is Ryan, and joining us today for our special Red Dead Redemption 2 Spoilercast, we've got our cowpokes, Joel Taveras,
How you doing, everybody?
and we've also got Tomas Franzizi.
Hey everyone.
I got it right that time. Good. So anyway, welcome to the Shockcast, and as the title mentioned, we are going to go deep into the into Red Dead Redemption 2, which is easily probably the one of the biggest games of the year, if not the biggest game of the year. So obviously, this is your spoiler warning that if you've not finished the main story of Red Dead Redemption 2, that you should probably not be listening and go finish up the
Yeah,
game before
like
you.
what do you do? Like what are you doing here?
Why'd you click on a spoiler cast if you're in the game?
Yeah, we're pretty much going to go through most, if not all, of the story and the epilogue. So we recommend not listening to this until after you finish the game. So with that, we're going to jump right into the discussion, and we'll just start off really quickly first with just our initial sort of thoughts and reactions to the game. So Joel, do you want to start us off and just what did you think of Red Dead Redemption 2, and did it live up to your expectations for the game?
Yeah. So what's funny is as we're working through it, I think the conversation kept coming up over and over. Not just like within the site, but like externally. I kept talking about it because I think everybody was just talking about it, right? That first release weekend, it was like nonstop, and
Yep.
that first week I kept talking about it as well, and the conversation just kept coming up like, oh, it's really good, right? But it's still not as good as God of War. And it's funny, like I kept, up to a certain point, I was like, yeah, this is amazing. God of War is still game of the year. God of War is still game of the year.
Mm.
And as Arthur's story was winding down, and I got towards chapter 6, and I was just like, okay, I was like, this is great. This was really good. It was a good ride. I loved it. And then going into the epilogue, I didn't know it was going to basically say like, hey, this is not done. We're not done with you. Um, and that's when I was just like, wow, this is really good, and this is in fact living up to expectations, and that really kind of drove everything home, because you think you're getting that big payoff, and Arthur's looking off into the sunset, and then you're just seeing like John Marston's life, and you're like, oh wow, that's cool. They're like included and set it up for the original Red Dead. You're like, no, wait a minute, he's not done here. And it's like you get double redemption.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It was just yeah. That so now in terms of like living up to expectations, I think it did somehow live up to those expectations. And now, if you ask me, what is game of the year, in my thought, in my head, it's a coin flip.
Yeah,
That's how I came away with it.
I think it's going to be interesting game like as far as game of the year conversation, because like you said, like God of War obviously is going to be another huge contender. I think Spider-Man also is going to be another sort of game that's in the conversation, and maybe Smash Brothers and things like that. But Red Dead, I think definitely, like, there was so much expectation, like easily, like I think that expectations were sky high for this game, and I think like having reviewed it and played it and all that, I think it just like it really met pretty much everything that I could have hoped for from this game and beyond. And I know that like reading and hearing other people's thoughts on the game, like from both within our team and sort of outside the site, hearing people have pretty divisive responses, I think, to this game has been interesting. But I can understand why people, and we'll go into this later on in the cast, why people sort of have some mixed responses to this game. Tomas,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead, Joel.
No, really quick. I just thought of it's like when you're watching an award show, and like, wow, you're like, wow, there's really great films this year. Wow, that was a good film. That was a good film. And then you're like, oh, but Daniel Day-Lewis was in this one. It's like,
And I
I
think
feel
that
like
there's
it's like one of those years.
Yeah, and it's because like I think like people knew going into, like, obviously it's a Rockstar game and it comes with like a certain pedigree of sort of like prestige and expectation for what you can get from them. But in a lot of ways I feel like this game kind of subverted some of those expectations, because and like we'll go into this later on once we get into the story stuff, but I feel like this is really sort of Rockstar's most restrained and mature game that they've done, which is like it's very interesting compared to, especially compared to GTA 5, which I felt like was a very sort of cynical and very
Did you
like
just
dark
say
game.
Rockstar and restrained in the same sentence?
Well, I think compared to their past games, like this is a very
Yeah.
this game is very much more quiet and sort of reserved, I think, than a game like GTA 5, or GTA 5 was just like batshit crazy in a lot of parts. Like, when you're shooting aliens while you're high and stuff like that. Like, I think compared to that, this is like a much they're their devotion to storytelling and getting deeper into these characters in this world, I think, is much more interesting. At least I think compared to what we've seen in their past games. Tomas, what did you think about Red Dead Redemption 2, and sort of your overall thoughts on the game?
I thought it was really great. It still isn't my favorite game of the year, but from a technical level, I can probably say it is like the best game ever made, just like from a pure technical and standpoint, uh, with what they were able to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a couple problems with like pacing and a couple problems with the stories, which kind of held it back for me. So I didn't feel like I got like as immersed as you and Joel were talking about. But
Mm-hmm.
it's still probably I probably liked it a bit more than Grand Theft Auto 5. It's probably on par with the original Red Dead with how much I like it. But yeah, and I know this isn't a spoiler cast about those games, but I think God of War and Spider Man just stuck with me a little bit more this
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
So like I still like would prefer them, but like that's not this like this year's been so great for games. Like in any other year, all three of these titles would have been like game of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, let's start kind of going into some of the gameplay and the setting of the game. So first, let's talk about the setting, because obviously this is, Red Dead Redemption 2 is another, sort of Western epic style game, much like the original Red Dead. But I think what sets this game apart is the fact that Rockstar really put in a lot of time and attention to the details and sort of the sense of immersion of this game, because there's so much more room to interact with NPCs and sort of objects in the environment. So what did you guys think about that, and sort of how they expanded on the ways that you can interact with this world?
It was really interesting the fact that you could go up to anybody and basically like say hi or be a dick to them. But and while it did get a little repetitive once you kind of noticed, it was kind of like canned responses, like still just the fact that you could do that with everybody and there would be like a reaction was very impressive, I think from a like just a dialogue standpoint. And the world itself was super atmospheric with like tons of detail put into it. There were a couple times where I would just be like in awe as I was wandering around, like the one mission where you're going up the mountain with the Indian chief. I just like looked off at one point, and you could just see like the entire map, and you're just kind of like, "Holy shit, this game's huge."
Yeah, yeah. The game's scale, like, it's funny because like when we previewed the game a couple weeks before it came out, like we really I think Rockstar kind of honed in a lot on the fact that there's so much detail, and just you know the minuscule things that you can do in this game were just so impressive. But it also is just impressive on like a size scale too, because it's just such a huge game. Like you look out and you see these like gigantic landscapes out in the distance and the mountains and everything like that. So it's just the fact that this game packs in so much into this like huge world is really incredible. Joel, what did you think about that, and sort of how the game immersed you?
Yeah, I think the part that really got me was like realizing, for a second I was like, maybe this map is not so big. Maybe that was a lot of,
No, it's
maybe it was.
huge. It's huge.
No,
It's
no,
like
I know, I know. And then what really kind of made me say like, okay, this is kind of ridiculous. It's when you start like just wandering around, finding like little mini communities that aren't listed on the map, and then within those mini communities, you can go into like each house. I was like, all right, this is getting kind of crazy.
yeah.
And seeing that at that scale, and finding like little, people that live up in the mountains, and finding like, a couple of houses, and you're like, what is going on here? And like the fact that they went to that kind of length, just to put in, just to give it that extra layer of realism. But in terms of immersion, I don't think anything creates the immersion quite like the animals do and how they
Mm.
function. Because just last night, I've so since I finished, I'm like just basically trying to get all the legendary pelts and all that stuff, and watching the animals from their day cycles to their night cycles, how they interact with one another, how they behave around those legendary animals. Once those guys start moving around, and you see like deers and stuff like that running away from predators, it's like really crazy. And just that's I to me that's what kind of like puts the immersion up to another kind of like level.
Yeah, and I think one of my the animals are obviously really impressive because just the fact that there's like such a vast ecosystem of different animals and things you could run into. I think for me, my favorite sort of aspect of the immersive nature of the game was from the Vanderlyn gang camp because there was just so much to sort of interact with and do there. Because basically, like the camp would move around between different parts of the map, and I feel like every time I went to the camp, there was always some cool little like story or thing I would find that like even though it's obviously like it's stuff that's I'm sure is scripted, like it didn't feel that way. Like I think one of my favorite parts was later on in the game. I was like wandering through the camp, and Dutch was I think having an argument with one of the other ladies in the camp, and like she was criticizing him for his leadership, and he's like, well, what else am I supposed to do? I'm trying to keep everyone to survive and stuff like that. And it was just great to get those little bits of storytelling that like you don't get from the main game, but I feel like adds so much more context to what you're doing in the game. And I feel like the camp was really a cool sort of place to do that.
Yeah. Well, I have some problems with the larger crew as a whole. I'll admit that there were some really great moments like that when you were walking around camp or at certain points in the story when there's like a huge success and everybody's celebrating. You
Yeah,
can just
that one
walk.
was great. The
Yeah,
party,
yeah. The
the night
party.
party.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of parties, but like you mean the one where like Javier's playing guitar and they're all singing,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's like
There's
one of
that
the
one
best
scene.
scenes.
That
Yeah.
great.
So yeah, no,
It's not even like a shooting scene. It's not like an over the top like
yeah.
train car robbery. It's not like this like let's go take down this crew. It's literally just people hanging out. It's like the best part of the game.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah. I was
definitely.
like during that scene, like I was just trying to look at each of the individual characters to see what they were doing, and it was just crazy to see. Like you see, like John and Abigail and Jack, and they're like hugging each other and holding each other, and then like Bill's drinking in the background stuff. It was just crazy to see the amount of little details that were packed just into that one, like probably couple minute long scene.
Yeah, I remember too, and it was even like even outside of that they'd have stuff. I remember one time it was earlier on in the game before John kind of changes, but there was just one time I came back to the camp and he was just explaining to like all the guys why you should never get married. And it was or have like a kid with like basically what his situation was. So it was just really funny to just kind of be like you could just completely walk by and ignore it even with like those parties. The world's like as immersive as you want to be, like how you were describing those like animal ecosystems. You can pretty much ignore it if you want. Like you never have to kill an animal outside of like one of the first missions. But it's just super impressive. Like if you go looking in the game, there's like an immense amount of detail.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just like what I loved especially about it is the fact that with the NPCs, even though the conversations that you have with the NPCs may like over time become a little repetitive or may not add a ton to what you're doing, I just feel like it creates sort of like what we've been focusing in on the fact that it just makes everything feel so much more like tangible and immersive, and the fact that like the NPCs don't just feel like window dressing, like they don't feel like they're just walking around doing random things, for the fact that they need to fill out the environments more. Like it like when you go into the saloons and you see people like having drinks, having conversations with each other, like it just makes the places you visit feel that much more sort of alive and inviting, and that's kind of why I liked going into all these different spaces just to sort of see what was inside there. So with that, let's move on to sort of the combat and the more action heavy stuff, because I feel like that's sort of been one of the biggest sort of divisive conversations around this game, is that people that either find the combat that it works and it's okay, or people that really hate it and think that the controls are just terrible. So what did you guys think about sort of the combat and the more action heavy stuff in this game?
So like the auto aiming's really bad because it brings you like slightly to the left of where you need to be. So like you can never shoot anything properly with it.
You
For
mean
the
like
most,
you mean like when you sort of snap to a
yeah,
character?
yeah.
Or I actually
You,
didn't think it was that bad. Like I actually thought like most of the time it helped me out. Like
oh
when I was
really?
aiming.
I don't. It might have just been like I don't know, like my file or something. But just that, yeah. Every time I'd use it, it'd be like slightly to the left of the person.
Because usually,
It's
kind
kind
of
of
what I would do is just sort of like snap to a guy, and then I would raise my reticle a little bit, and
yeah.
then I would pretty much always get a headshot most of the
Yeah,
time when
no,
I did
yeah,
that.
no, it works like that, but it was just I found it a little weird, and the controls are purposefully like kind of slow, which I
Yeah,
don't mind, but just it highlighted issues with stuff like the auto aiming and having to tap A to run, and like I didn't know until like just a couple of days ago that you could set it where you just had to tap A once, but I've always hated that in Rockstar games where it's like mash like A or X on PlayStation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like with the controls, like I would say they still have a little bit of that Rockstar jankiness that I think but I feel like this is the best that the Rockstar jankiness has
Oh,
been. Like it's
definitely.
definitely, I feel like it's definitely much better than GTA 4 or 5 were.
Yeah,
And
there's even some more like in-depth mechanics that they don't really tell you that much. Like I learned just I think there was some random pop-up, but it didn't really seem to be triggered by anything, where it said that if you like press X to the beat of like your horse kind of like trotting,
oh yeah,
it'll
it like
actually
drains
go
their
faster.
stamina less or whatever, something
Yeah, it
along
actually
those
makes you
lines.
go a bit faster. So like that was cool. Where you
Yeah.
kind of have those little rhythmic systems in there.
Yeah, and personally, like I think it was cool just sort of the way that they separated the commands between when you have your weapon holstered and when you don't. So basically, like when you have your weapon not holstered, you can focus on an object and then choose to interact with them, like or an object or an animal or a human or whatever. And I think like overall control wise, I was okay with how everything moved. Like from Rockstar games, I expect that sort of weightiness and that sort of momentum, so it wasn't really new to me. I just think maybe the only criticism that I might have of the controls is that there's just so many different things you can do that it's just hard to remember sometimes. Where it was like, oh yeah, you can, if you're aiming your weapon at someone, you can fire a warning shot if you aim your weapon up in the air. But it's just like, and I was listening to another podcast and they kind of compared it to like the original Assassin's Creed games where when you held down the shoulder buttons kind of modify all the other face buttons of the controller. Like I just felt like sometimes it just was hard to remember sometimes all the things you could do.
Yeah, it was contextual in some situations too, or like at one point, like searching a drawer would be triangle, but then if there was something else you could do, it'd become square. So there wasn't always like that fluidity between
Yeah,
what every button did.
like when we'll talk about the horses in a second, but sometimes like when you would try to like focus on your horse and you'd accidentally punch them in the face because you were trying to like lead them or do something else instead. I did that a couple times and I felt awful when I just like clocked my horse in the face. Like
I never did that actually, but
I actually, it's yeah, because I forget. There's like another button where basically it's like if you hold L2 and focus on them and press, circle, it does something. But like if you don't do it the right way, you'll just punch your horse in the
yeah,
face. It's the worst
it
feeling thing
was
ever.
yeah, it was also fairly easy to like. I got the hang of it like 10 or so hours in, but at first it was hard to like not like point a gun at somebody when I was going to talk to them because it was really easy if you just wanted to talk to somebody to
Right?
accidentally
Yeah.
like pull your gun out.
Yeah,
So
and then they're like, "Whoa, partner!" Like that.
mhm.
They start like getting violent against you. And yeah, I think the only other thing maybe for me, like as far as critiquing the controls, is just that like because everything is so context heavy. Like sometimes I felt like I'd have to reposition Arthur in like the right way, so that way he would like be able to interact with an object. Like especially if I was in like one of the general stores or I was looting, like sometimes he wouldn't be in the right position to be able to loot it, so I had to like fumble him around a little bit so that way he would do that. Apparently, if you if you do that stuff in first person, that's a little easier, which I think makes sense. But I think it just feels more like a band aid rather than like a ideal solution to that.
Yeah, this might have been me too, and it might just be like atmospheric to add to the pace. But there were a couple times too where I press a button prompt, and then Arthur would take like 5 seconds to walk in a square back to where he needed to be.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, there was just some like, I mean, in a game that massive, you're bound to have a couple issues. But yeah,
right, yeah,
some weird quirks like that.
yeah. Joel, what did you think about like as far as the gameplay and everything?
I mean, I think I expected the Rockstar Games jankiness, like you just mentioned earlier, so I won't beat a dead horse in that respect. I thought that
Pun intended.
pun totally, completely, 100% intended. I think the first person definitely helped a lot in having it out of the gate. Definitely helped in certain situations. But yeah, I mean, the Rockstar was never known to like have like this amazing, it's what it is too. I mean, I think it's also a combination of like, hey, everyone just finished playing Spider-Man, which is probably the most fluid, like, moving character that we've had in a video game. Outside of like stuff like Devil May Cry or whatever. That
Yeah,
you
and
kind
it
of like
moves much sort of more quickly than Red Dead for sure.
yeah, you're just like flying all over the screen, right? And I think slowing down isn't easy for a lot of people, especially when with a lot of games we're literally just running around like maniacs. So this forced like weightiness or slow down, it's like an acquired taste, and I get it. I totally get it. It's not for everybody. But then you know, as you guys mentioned, the controls can get a bit convoluted at certain times. So it's like you really got to earlier on. I think chapter 1 and 2, you really got to read those prompts as much as you can to really understand, you know, your weapon wheel. Really understand how to toggle between the said weapons before you're leaving your horse, which I guess we'll get to next. Or should we just segue into it?
We could segue into that. Yeah, we could talk about the horse stuff.
Yeah, I thought so. The horse stuff to me was brilliant. Like, you know, I mean, it was a bit annoying. I was just like, shit, where are we? Who are these people? These are Driscolls. Why do you shotgun? Like, like trying to figure out like what you need to take with you. But I think like that the idea of like the horse packing its own like side inventory and you're managing that as you go. I thought that was really cool.
I thought it was good. I had a couple problems with what I think was automation, where I'd like switch the weapons I put or
Yeah.
automatically like de-equip them. Where like I'd make sure I'd have like a shotgun and a rifle before I got off, but then I'd either die or like start the battle and notice like that I only had my two pistols. So like
Yeah, I had
and
that a couple
I
times.
never like put them away myself. So it was kind of odd where like I think the game's just automatically like, oh well, you don't need those right now, and unless you check every time before you like get off your horse.
Yeah, that was something in my tips post I specifically made sure to call out because that happened to me a couple times when I would do a mission where like if you're riding for a while, he'll automatically like de-equip his main weapons and just have his pistols. So I made sure being like, hey, before you go into the mission, make sure that you have your weapons you want to bring equipped, because otherwise there were missions when it was like I was midway through and I was like, oh crap, I don't have my shotgun or whatever, and I only just had like a
You're
rifle and the
just doing
pistols.
the bank heist with the
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, as far as the horse stuff, I thought like the ways that they sort of expanded on, like I just really liked how they sort of had the mechanic of like you bonding with your horse and sort of creating a relationship with them. And because obviously in a game like this, compared to GTA you can go around and steal whatever cars you want, and they're just kind of disposable. Whereas this, like your horse is your main sort of companion and your way to travel throughout this world. So I think creating that relationship and that bond was really important, especially because there were plenty of times when like my horse would get stunned or whatever and have to use the reviver, and I just felt like my heart skip a beat because I was like, no, my horse, like I didn't want it to like to die on me. So
How many horses did you go through in the game?
I only had the one horse, which made it devastating when
Really?
your horse dies at the end. It's
Yeah, so
like,
I went through about four. The first one I glitch killed in a waterfall. And then like I was trying to jump over like a river just before like this little waterfall, and like I missed, and then the horse like glitched into the water and drowned. It's kind of weird.
oh, what was
Um,
everyone's horse's name, by the way?
what?
What was everyone's horse's name?
Mine
Oh,
was Epona.
Epona. Okay. Mine was Marble. Was my name.
yeah. Just Phil. I just gave it like a really
Phil.
plain name. Yeah. I was
Phil.
just like,
Phil
this is
the
my
horse.
Phil.
There were
Just kinda
some
joking
there
around
were
about
some
that,
there
but,
were some great horse names that I saw, and
mhm.
one of the ones that we came up with was Full Sprouse, which I didn't get to
Oh,
use, but I should have
that's
used
funny.
that one. It's
Yeah,
like,
one. Yeah, I think I named my third one E3 as a joke, but yeah. But yeah, like my first one, Phil died from a glitch. Then my second one, I had for a long time, and then I just like, I ended up like messing up where it died, and like nowhere near any town. So like I had to kill it. And then the third one, I think like I don't even remember. Oh no, the third one was one that I never really owned. I just put my saddle on it to get to town. And then I had like a fourth one I had for the end of the game. But then there was a funny thing in the final mission where it wasn't the horse I took with me into it for some reason. So then the horse that like died in that final segment wasn't one I was attached to at all. So it was kind of funny where he was just like, "Thank you for everything," and I'm like, "I've had that horse for like 5 minutes."
oh no, like that scene was way more devastating for me because like my horse I basically had like from the start of the game,
Oh,
and it was
yeah.
very
It was
devastating.
yeah, it was a moment. I was like, dang, if I still had that like second horse, like I would have been mad.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of funny because I had a horse I had for like all of 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. All right, cool. Let's start going into some of the characters then, because as Tomas noted in our talking points doc, there are many in this game. So first off, obviously we'll start with Arthur Morgan, who's the main protagonist of this game. And I
Is he
think it
though?
was. Sorry, go ahead, Joel.
I said, is he though?
I mean, yes, for the most part, yeah. And I think it was interesting with this game, and especially leading up to its release, how people were like, "Oh, where's John Marston?" Because obviously everyone wants to sort of see his story and from the first game. So what did you guys think of Arthur and having Rockstar choose to make him sort of the main character that we play as for the majority of the game?
He was honestly my favorite part of the story. He was a really great character where he's kind of this dumb and hot-headed outlaw at the beginning, but he's really the only one that begins to notice that, like, hey, the Wild West is coming to an end. And then as he starts to die of tuberculosis, he kind of notices like that he's lived a life of like kind of misery, and he's never really been happy, like with that girl Mary or whatever.
Yeah,
Dude,
Like I
those
even just,
letters were rough.
yeah, I even just to make it a little bit more tragic, I had him deny her both times. Uh, so like yeah, I liked, and you're able to shape it subtly like that too with like a few choices in the story. Um, which I thought was cool. So yeah, I thought his arc was really great, especially once he started getting sick, and you kind of knew like, yeah, he's dead. And so there was a certain thing in the like, because in the first game, nobody ever mentions Arthur Morgan because he wasn't conceived 8 years ago.
right.
But
Yeah,
just kind of knowing that you have to get to a point where he's not mentioned in the first Red Dead. Well, at the start, you might just be like, oh, well, he dies, so who cares? The game does get you to care for him in his redemption arc, where he's trying to help John start like a decent life with his family, which actually becomes a bit more tragic once you know their fate in the first Red Dead Redemption, and
yeah.
how the whole goal is basically to get um Jack, I believe, is the kid's name, to like not be involved in the life, but he still ends up getting wrapped back in like the epilogue of the first game.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I thought it kind of just created this kind of tragedy arc, yeah, where with a bit of redemption at the end. So yeah,
Yeah, I think Tomas hit all the points. With in regards to Arthur Morgan, I think he was well written, and yeah, I mean it's his like it's weird because we literally get two redemption stories in one, hence the number two in the title. I don't know.
Hmm.
It was just it was good to kind of see his character kind of like come full circle and realize before, I mean, others started realizing it as well, but he kind of realized it early on. And yeah, I think he was really well written across the board.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think like leading up to this game and the trailers, before its release, like Arthur kind of seemed like a dick. Like he really didn't seem like a very like appealing or likable character. So I'm really glad that like throughout the story they gave him way more depth and sort of layers to him rather than just being like because we knew going in he's sort of Dutch Vanderlyn's sort of right hand man, and he's very loyal to the gang. But obviously as the game goes on, like Tomas sort of pointed out, the fact that he starts to realize, oh, this is, things are going a bit wrong here. Like, this is maybe not the life I want to lead. Especially because he's only really known this life since he was a kid. And actually, I think I was. Another interesting thing is just sort of like the fact that you find out so much more about Arthur through, these sort of little details. Like when he has I think it's at his camp, he has the picture, and you realize that like he had a kid that, that died and things
I
like that. So,
yeah, with that I never noticed that until I was talking with the Indian chief. And then, like, I just saw one of the options that was like, talk about Arthur's son, and I was
yeah,
like, what,
it's
he
like
had a son? And then,
there's like some
yeah,
really like big things that you can find
and
out about his
yeah,
character.
yeah, he tells that whole story of like, oh, I used to return every couple months. Then I returned one time, and they were both dead, killed by a thief looking for like $5, which is like, it's kind of creepy once you notice that that's kind of what he does too.
Yeah,
So kind of
and
like,
I don't know if you guys also took the time to look at his journal too, but the journal is really really cool and adds a lot of like because everything's like
yeah,
handwritten and he sketches in it and stuff like
hmm,
that. It's really cool and adds a lot of cool little
yeah.
details to Arthur's character.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, that was, I was really like surprised at how subtle it is because I think we'll go into it more later, but the game takes its time to like kind of immerse you in everything and what the game is. and so I think even with some of the characters, like on a surface level, there isn't much there. But if you go looking for it, you'll find more, especially in the case of Arthur Morgan. I do still think the game suffers from having way too many main characters in the base camp, but we can get more into that in a bit.
Yeah, we'll get into that. All right, so I think we'll close the book on Arthur for now, and we'll move on to John, who obviously is, probably one of the most important characters, given that you get to play as him in the epilogue chapters of the game. So, what did you guys think about, not only like obviously we knew going in that John was going to be, sort of a supporting player in the game, but also the fact that you get to play as him in the sort of last acts of the game.
I love how when in the earlier missions in the game that they start out with, it's like oh, here's John Marston. By the way, I know you liked him from the first game, but he's actually a big idiot.
Yeah. I think it was interesting because like you see John pretty early in the game, like he's in the first chapter, and then he's pretty much always throughout the rest of the game. But I think it was interesting to sort of see his see him because I think like going into the game, obviously he's the character that we sort of have the closest relationship with because if you played Red Dead Redemption 1, you're gonna know a bit about him here. But I think that this game did a really good job of sort of subverting some of the things that we knew about John, or at least since we get to see him now, sort of when he was fully involved with Dutch's gang.
Right, or things you thought you knew about John.
Right, yeah, like you think, especially, we'll probably go into this when we talk about Dutch, but the fact that, like, when he decides to turn, and you mentioned this, Joel, in your editorial, the fact that, like, when John turns and decides to leave against the gang, like, it goes really differently than I think a lot of us thought we would, because we thought it would be him leaving of his own volition, but really it's kind of Arthur that coaxes him into being like, hey, you need to get out of here and start your own life.
That moment when he kind of hands the hat over. And that's Arthur's hat from the first game, right?
Right.
Okay.
Well, right. So, yeah, Marston's hat. Right, in the first game, you realize you're like, oh shit, this is Arthur.
It's Arthur's hat.
Yeah. When I saw him grab his hat, I was like, you better not. That better not be his hat. And then he puts it on him, and I was just like, I had to pause the game because I was just like, ah. Yeah. So I liked John's arc in this game. I felt like it took a while to get going, but especially once you get back from your Caribbean vacation, they do a really good job of like fleshing him out and kind of showing how he got screwed over by Dutch 2 for really no reason, and that Arthur, despite not liking him towards the beginning of the game, like kind of came around and helped him and was like really the only one that cared about his family's future. So you kind of see where Arthur got his kind of his like emotional motivation for the next game.
Yeah, and then obviously too, like his wife Abigail and his son Jack obviously play a big part in the the game too. I think it was especially interesting to see Jack like as a kid and seeing him where he's like not super into the whole sort of Wild West life, like he just wants to sort of read and stay inside, like that type of thing, and seeing John sort of struggle but like sort of come to terms with being a father and having to care for him and teach him the ways of this life.
So did that dog die or just disappear? Because I never saw it. Remember when
Rufus?
Yeah.
No, he's fine. He shows up later in the epilogue. He's okay.
Kane does? Okay, good. Yeah, he disappeared, so I was kind of like, I didn't know where.
No, he shows up. He's actually in like one of the missions in the game later on. That I won't say anything because you're still kind of going through the epilogue, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think like seeing that stuff with him, especially with John and Abigail and Jack, especially in the epilogue, is really interesting because like there's a great part in the epilogue where John takes Abigail on a date and they sort of walk through Blackwater together, and it's really just like it was such a nice especially after having been through all like the violence and bloodshed and everything in the past 50 hours of the game. It was nice to do something that was just so sort of intimate and
Tomas is not at the end of the epilogue.
Yeah, I know what happened.
Man.
I'm gonna try to refrain from spoiling as much as I can in the epilogue, but
God, all right.
I know what happens in the epilogue, so you're not really spoiling too much, but
I think like just that section really stood out to me as just
it's
like
long too is the other thing. Like I've played it for a couple hours and I haven't beat it. I've seen people saying it's like 4 to 8 hours.
The epilogue is probably one of the longest chapters.
Another game.
Like 10 years ago that would have been like a completely like they could have released the epilogue as like a Red Dead Redemption prequel and people probably would have been like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, the epilogue essentially sort of serves as like a bridge between the first game and between Red Dead Redemption 2 into Red Dead Redemption 1.
See, I was expecting them to just make the post-game Red Dead Redemption 1 and just remake it inside of 2.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Any other? If we don't have any other thoughts about John, we'll move on to Dutch Vanderland, who I feel like also is. Sorry, what, Joel?
That's what I wanted to get to was
Yeah,
Dutch.
yeah, yeah. Let's talk about Dutch because obviously he's another big sort of central figure, and I feel like this game does an excellent job of sort of shedding light on Dutch because like we saw Dutch in the first game, but like he didn't really show up I think much until like the end of the first game, as far as I remember from when I played it, and I feel like he was just such a great character in this game, like all around, like not only as a villain but just as like because obviously he is sort of the central antagonist in this game, but like just the way that Rockstar characterized him and made him into this really like more than just like a dastardly sort of villain. Like he's really just like fleshed out, and I personally loved getting to know more about him and sort of his goals and everything. So Joel, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think like Dutch in terms of like who had the most like layers. I think as a character. I mean, obviously we're building those layers with Arthur and John, but Dutch comes in with the most. And you're kind of like peeling off each one as you're kind of going along and really understanding him as a person and as a leader of the gang. And just seeing really understanding what his motivations are like I think to me the biggest part of the game is realizing like that it really yes he cares about people, quote unquote. Yes, he's not forcing anybody to stay, but at the end of the day Dutch cares about Dutch, and that's what and you don't see it I think until you're on that oil refinery mission and he was going to abandon Arthur. I think that was at the end of
Yeah.
I
middle,
think
middle of
you,
chapter 5. You're like, wait a minute, what's this guy doing?
I do think you get it as early as when he kills Bronte, but yeah, I definitely like once he kind of abandons Arthur there, you kind of are like, okay, he's completely gone, and I think that
Yeah.
was I guess we can talk about one of the deaths. It was spurred on by the death of Hosea, where like Hosea kind of pissed Dutch off, but it kind of seems like he kind of kept him grounded, and like he kind of knew Dutch was like just out for himself. So
Right.
once
Yeah.
Hosea died and Dutch was fueled by that rage, he just kind of went off the deep end. And especially when you had Micah there, who I wouldn't say Dutch was the main antagonist, I'd say Micah was. But yeah, once Micah starts manipulating him, like he kind of just gets to the point where he he's like completely unhinged and fending for himself, and then it's even like shown further because I know he kills Micah in the epilogue, so like it's that just kind of shows where he's kind of unhinged and just out for himself at that point.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest sort of turning points for Arthur starting to realize that Dutch. Obviously, the big one is like when he kills Cornwall, when he just he just sort of says
That
fuck
was
it and just shoots
I
him, and
was
it's just like
I was not expecting that at all.
yeah, no,
And
and I
that's
think that's why
incredible.
that moment works so well is because it just comes out of left field and just completely catches you off guard. Joel, you were gonna say more?
Yeah, well, yeah, no, and that's what it was. Is that you went over first of all when he's like, "Oh, we're gonna go negotiate with this guy." I was like, "What?" I was like, "This guy wants to kill everybody." Like, what are you talking about? He's the one that's like, funding the Pinkertons behind the scenes to come and take out this gang or take out all gangs, right? Because
Right.
this
Yeah.
guy, because Cornwall's thing was just like, "Hey, look, like this old west, these gangs are standing in the way of me making money. I need these people to not exist. I'm gonna, funnel money through law enforcement or through local government to get these guys eradicated." So that was like, he was like big picture thinking, like he was a big part of like this whole death of the old west kind of thing because he brought money to the table. So I'm thinking like, Cornwall was going to be this big like maybe not big, like maybe not a final boss or whatever, but like I thought he was going to be like a much bigger player towards the end of the game. So when he's like, "Oh, let's go negotiate with him," and then he just
He
kills
just
him, I was
kills
like,
him. Yeah.
what? Wait, who's the bad guy?
And I think
Yeah, I
it,
think that was purposefully anticlimactic. Like they kind of build him up, and then they just kill him like that because you think they're building up this villain, but they're actually just building up Dutch the whole time. Because once you know who Cornwall is, and then Dutch just offs him like that, like it is very impactful.
Yeah, and I think it plays really well into one of sort of the central ideas of this game. Like the whole idea of this game is the fact that like the Vanderlyn gang is essentially sort of trying to outrun civilization and sort of their way of life being eradicated. And I think Dutch's whole sort of central arc in this game is really interesting in that, and the fact that like he keeps saying throughout the game, "Oh, we just need one more score. Oh, we just need one more. We need some money so we can get out of here. We can go somewhere else." But like basically any time that they've tried to do that and get themselves out of a jam, they just kind of wind up in another bigger jam. So I think it was really interesting. Even though like I think at the beginning of the game at first that might have felt a little repetitive because it was like, "Oh, Dutch keeps saying this over and over." Like that's basically sort of the whole idea of this game, and the fact that Dutch is like keeps trying to get them out, but they just they can't. They're stuck.
Yeah. And then even once he gets the money, he ends up just kind of staying. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I know like the train job didn't go like perfect, but like he probably could have left then, but then he's still in the mountains with Micah because he kind of knows what he did. So it's kind of interesting when you look at that, like at that where you like, okay, they finally got the score that they needed, but they lost everything in the process.
Yeah, I think we can move on now to Micah, who you said is kind of the like who you think is sort of the main antagonist in this game.
Yeah, from the start you can tell he's unhinged. Just as soon as he shoots up Strawberry, just for like 2 guns, you're kind of like, oh, this guy's off. I kind of had a feeling he was the rat as soon as you got back from Guarma, and like some of the comments he was making, I found it pretty obvious that he was the one that was like working with the Pinkertons. But yeah, the game makes you hate him really well because you just see how he's manipulating Dutch and how just like deplorable he actually is.
Yeah.
Whereas like Arthur and John are bad guys, but they at least kind of have this honorable or like redemption wanting edge to them, whereas Micah's just like gone off the deep end.
Yeah, and I think just sort of the relationship that Arthur and Micah have, where they have this very like antagonistic, competitive relationship, I think was really interesting to see. Like especially once Arthur gets tuberculosis, and Micah starts digging at him, being like, "Oh, hey, black lung," like trying to sort of push him down as much as he can.
Yeah, well, because he knows that Arthur is Dutch's like favorite, basically.
Right.
And
yeah.
so as soon as he sees like Arthur in that weakened state and Dutch in that vulnerable state, he kind of works his way into a place where he can become the new favorite.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Joel, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think early on, I knew Micah was going to be a problem. Just from that, like, first mission in Strawberry, I was like, I hate this guy.
Yeah.
And whenever I would see the M pop up on my map, I was just like, I would do everything else before going to go help him.
Yeah, don't you find it kind of ironic, though, that Arthur could have just left him in that cell and it would have gone like
he would have been fine, yeah.
None of it would have happened, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was just like a nuisance, and it was just funny because I was just avoiding him at all costs. But then when he basically takes advantage of, I think too, there were times, and the game did this pretty frequently, where it kind of like, it's like, oh, go talk to Mrs. Grisham or whatever her name was at Grimshaw. And like you'll go, Miss Grimshaw needs to go talk to you, and you go talk to her, and then like Dutch comes out of nowhere. He's like, "Hey, you got to go with Micah here." I'm like, "What?"
I hated that. I'll get into that when we discuss all the characters, but they make you think like, oh, we're finally gonna flesh out Mrs. Grimshaw on a mission, and then you go talk to her, and then like 5 seconds in, Dutch is like, "I need your help."
He's like, "I got a plan."
Yeah, so like it ended up working from a story standpoint, but it was kind of disappointing where you're like, oh, I'm gonna get to know like Mary Beth or Mrs. Grimshaw or Tilly, like these underdeveloped characters a bit more.
Yeah.
They just kind of snipe at 5 seconds in where it's like, oh, you want to go ride 5 minutes with Dutch again?
Yeah. Before we move on to sort of those other characters, I think the last sort of major character we should talk about is Sadie Adler, who I think is probably my favorite character in this game. I think she's just such a great. She's like so fun and just like really. She like I always wanted to go on a mission with her, pretty much.
She could have held the post game. I had a feeling it was going to be John just because it was kind of the obvious pick, but with how the story was and everything, I was even half expecting. I'm like, oh, they could make Sadie the playable character. Like
that was my
they
thought.
They do a really great job developing her.
Yeah. So actually, when I was putting the review together and stuff, and I saw the review screenshots they showed the picture of Sadie, like, and she had all like the coat and she had the bandolier and stuff like that. So I thought, oh, is the epilogue going to be Sadie and you play as her? Obviously, it didn't turn out that way. But I would have loved to have been able to play as Sadie. But I think she's like just a great character and was, probably my favorite of the new ones that were introduced in this game.
Hmm. Yeah, no, yeah, especially she takes some time to get going, as like because they kind of just ignore her for a good portion. But
Yeah, but
once
later
they
in the
start,
game, she
once
she
yeah,
becomes.
once you're gone and you come back, and she really, well, I mean, I guess in Rhodes you first kind of see it in that mission, but then like especially once you get back from Guarma, um, you kind of just see how much she's like changed and improved, and she's the only like kind of other respectable cowboy there, so
Yeah,
cowgirl. So it's just kind of neat to see them do it with like because the first Red Dead Redemption didn't really have a female character like that, so
I mean there
this
was
one
there
kind
was
of fleshed one
Bonnie.
out.
Bonnie was probably like the
Yeah,
biggest of those
I
characters you were
yeah,
introduced to.
but still, she wasn't like a female version of John. And I'm not saying
Right?
Sadie's
Yeah.
just a female version of Arthur, but like to kind of have it where you can be like, yeah, it's John, Sadie, and Arthur all kind of on equal ground.
Yeah.
It's like this little sect of Dutch's gang. Like I found that cool.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I thought Sadie was great. I think probably one of the strongest female characters that Rockstar's written. And watching her, yeah, I felt bad though at the end because I don't know if what you guys did, but I didn't go take out the rest of the O'Driscolls with her
I think I did that. I'm pretty
I
sure.
did
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
because
Yeah.
at that point I was just like exhausted. I was like, nah, man, we don't got to kill anymore.
yeah. You just shoots up everything and then like stabs a guy to death in a barn. So
Yeah, so I didn't
yeah.
go with her, and what's funny is that it didn't get me like I thought not going with her was the right decision to make, and it was like no negative cowboy points. I was like, oh no, But outside of that, I thought Sadie was awesome, and I every single time that she showed up, I was like, yes, let's go do this,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially in the epilogue.
Yeah, yeah, and also I think one of my favorite missions was that ridiculous one with the hot air balloon when you're like up in the hot air
Oh
balloon
yeah.
shooting people and she's down below, and
Mhm.
it was just like the sheer like ludicrousy of it was awesome with that.
R.I.P. hot air balloon
I
guy.
know, hot air balloon guy that gets shot in the face. Anyway, let's just touch on really quick just a couple of the other like sort of characters that you come across in the Vanderlyn gang. So obviously there's Bill Williamson, who I don't think you get like a ton of time with Bill in this game, other than like a few couple missions. But it was cool to see him sort of come back. Charles, who I also really liked a lot. I think he was an interesting character because he just sort of added this whole other dimension with to the game with his relationships with the sort of Native American communities that were in the game. Hosea, who we touched on before. Let's talk about Lenny really briefly because I think we probably want to talk about the mission where you get drunk with Lenny in the bar, which is like probably
Yeah,
one
that
of
was
the most memorable
yeah.
missions in this game.
Yeah, I actually wish there were more missions with other characters like that. But yeah, it was a great mission. Just like once everybody starts turning into Lenny, and you're just walking around.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
yeah. I've never been that drunk because I'm underage. Don't drink, kids. But it's but yeah, it was just really funny.
I think that mission and Lenny's interactions throughout the game, out of everybody that like dies, I was so upset about Lenny.
Oh, I know. Yeah, when Lenny just gets a shotgun to the
Yeah,
chest and
yeah,
like,
his death's so like, just like kind of blah out of nowhere. Where like it makes sense because like they have to start killing people, but yeah, you're just kind of escaping and he gets shot, and then you're like, oh, I got really drunk with that guy. That kind of sucks. You know what I mean? So I just and now that we're kind of discussing the broader picture, some of the deaths weren't as impactful for me because they didn't really have missions like that. Like Lenny's the only death like that in the first part of the game there that I really cared about. Whereas like someone like Kieran who ends up dying, like I forgot Kieran existed. And then they were like, "Oh no, they killed Kieran and made it this huge moment." And I was kind of like, "Who?"
I mean, they didn't just kill him though.
yeah,
It was
Yeah,
just-
yeah. Then they chopped off his head, but yeah, it was kind of weird because the game was like, "Oh, aren't you sad this character died? Aren't you sad Sean died?" And it was just kind of like, "Well, Sean has been in the game since for like all of like 3 or 4 missions." So
yeah.
I found that a bit weird where like who they decided to not flesh out.
Yeah. Well, I think because they had to save a lot of like the major deaths toward the end of the game, so like when Arthur dies, or Micah later on, and things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
so yeah, I think it was the plot was good for the most part. I just thought they could have if they had just narrowed down that crew to like the core, I think it would have been like just kind of like Sadie, Charles, Lenny, Arthur, John, Dutch, Hosea. Just kind of left it there. Like I think once they added all the other women who don't really do anything, and then like Kieran and Pearson who don't really do anything, and Uncle who doesn't really do anything, like none of them get too many missions either. Like you get some good interactions with them around camp, but I just never felt like any of those characters were fleshed out to a point that made them interesting enough, which I was hoping the game was going to do a bit more with Uncle, considering he's supposed to be the protagonist from Red Dead Revolver. Like that's the theory. So I thought
mhm.
they were going to wrap that in a bit more, considering it was a prequel. But he's just kind of this side character. So I kind of just wish they, in some of the story missions earlier on, as you're slowly getting settled into everything, they would have like had you get to know those characters a bit better.
Yeah, and I think that that's like one of the things like with this game being so like compared, especially compared to the first Red Dead, where this is like way more of like an ensemble sort of cast versus Red Dead One, where it was basically just sort of John's story. But I didn't really mind the fact that like there are so many characters to interact with, and even though not all of them sort of get fleshed out all the way, I think that's kind of where the immersive aspect of this game comes into play because you can find out more about these characters just by like interacting with them, and especially even the characters like Tilly and Molly, who I think you can have a choice to have a conversation with in the camp. Like that was just a good opportunity, sort of like to give some more like in-depth storytelling for those characters, like but without taking away from the main narrative of the game.
Yeah, I just my problem with it is when the main narrative relies on characters like that, where they
Yeah,
want you to care about Kieran's death. Yeah, you may have like a good conversation or side activity you could do with Kieran early on in the game, but like if it's kind of a double-edged sword where it's like it's cool that the game would let you do that with those characters, but then if you just don't do it or it doesn't like randomly spawn for you, their death is kind of meaningless to you or it doesn't have that emotional impact.
yeah. All right, I think we'll move on from the characters now, and we'll start to just sort of get into some of the highlights from the story. So just I know we've touched on it a little bit earlier, but in terms of like the story pacing and the structure, what did you guys think? Because I feel like that's been one of the more divisive aspects of this game is just how the story is sort of paced.
It's good as soon as you rob Leviticus's corn or Leviticus Cornwall's train.
Leviticus's Cornwall is
Yeah,
like.
yeah. This is my cornfield. I call it Leviticus's Cornwall. Uh, but yeah, as soon as you rob that train at the start, it like basically picks up uh pretty well. It's just I understand why they kind of ease you into everything in the mountains. I do personally think starting with the Blackwater heist would have been better, but I understand why they kind of start where they do. I also found it a bit confusing though because like why didn't they go on the other side of the mountains? Like they went from Blackwater up into the mountains and then just came back down towards Blackwater, which I found kind of weird because
Yeah, I
I
don't
thought it was
know,
going to
but
work the opposite way.
I
But
think.
yeah, but yeah, so it takes its time. But then also, I wasn't the biggest fan of that first section because I also didn't feel like it set up that much. It was just kind of slow for the sake of easing you into the world slowly without even like fleshing out too many people. So I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but once you hit like chapter two, it was great.
Yeah, and I think like you said, like chapter one of the game is basically sort of your introduction and like the tutorials, and I think that the way I know people have said that this game feels very slow, and while I agree with that in some ways, I just feel like the game feels a little bit more deliberate, like rather than giving you a big action heavy scene to sort of kickstart your way into the world. Like I feel like this was the better way to go, where it's just like they ease you into the mechanics and sort of how to play this game and understand everything, rather than setting you up with some like big heist initially. Yeah, so basically, then like chapter one, you're in the mountains and you're with Dutch and the gang, and they're trying to sort of flee after the Blackwater heist goes awry. And then chapter two is kind of where the story opens up and everything, and that's where the open world especially begins to open up, and you go to Valentine in those parts of the game.
Yeah, and I think they do that purposefully because in chapter 2 you learn a little bit more about the camp and how to use like the tools that are available there. I think a lot of people have like the right grievance where they're upset with, hey, I have to travel from X, from A to B, and it's taking me this long, whatever. And I
Right.
think
Yeah.
one of the things where I think Rockstar could have just done better in these first 3 chapters is really go into detail as to how to unlock the fast travel, rather
Yeah,
than you kind of
because
having to read
Yeah,
the
those
ledger to figure that out.
fast travel was pretty bad in the game, and I understand why they didn't have it because that's it. Kind of same thing like fast travel in Spider-Man. Like, why would you fast travel in that game?
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, because it's like kind of getting to the destinations just as important than Red Dead Redemption 2. But they were just I thought it was kind of handled poorly because you could only do it from your camp and only to like certain towns.
Right,
So
yeah, and
I
because the fast travel from the camp, I think, is one way, so it's like it would get you to the place, but then you still have
yeah.
to figure out a way to go. I only fast traveled once, I think. I used the train one time to get from one place to Saint Denis, and that was really about it.
Yeah, I used the carriage a couple times, but yeah, but then especially because you couldn't use those things once you had bounties, and then the game would like automatically give you bounties in some story missions.
Right,
So
yeah.
I just found that kind of weird. Where like I understand them not wanting you to use it, but the game actively made the fast travel system bad, so you wouldn't use it, which I found kind of weird.
Yeah, yeah.
What's interesting is that I used it more heavily in chapters 5 and 6, because I didn't unlock it until like the end of chapter 3. But I felt like it was good in 5 and 6 only because those had so many missions in them. I think they each had like 12 to 14 missions in them. So it was for me. I found it easier to literally just bounce from one area of the map to get to where I need to do, get where I need to be, get what I need to get done. But the yeah, to your point, I mean, it really didn't work well. I think it was just like well enough because you still had to travel once you got to someplace. But it's interesting you brought up the bounty thing, and I don't think we talked about it earlier. Everyone was complaining about like bumping into people and like triggering bounties and issues. I didn't have that issue. Now I don't know if it was because I had a pretty like loyal character, like my loyalty level was really high.
No,
But
I didn't have that either. I think that's just like I said, the controls. I think if you're just not as like familiar with them as first, at first, like that tends to happen. But I was talking more about kind of like story contextual stuff where like you'd get
Oh,
bounties.
okay. Yeah, because everyone was talking about like, oh, I bumped into these people and I can't go to this town now, and I accidentally did this and this and this, and I'm like, I don't, I just didn't see that in my time with the game, and I played a lot of it.
Yeah,
Like,
I
and
don't think I had too many issues with that. The only times I think I had issues sometimes were like with my horse would accidentally like plow into someone, and then like they would go run off and try and tell the police, and I had to be like, no, stop, no, I didn't mean to, like that type of thing. But yeah, I also played Arthur pretty loyally, so I didn't really have too many issues. I feel like the game punished, from what I've heard from people that played it a bit more, like making Arthur more of a like outlaw type of character. That's when the game really like punishes you for playing sort of violently and more antagonistically.
yeah, because I only had to pay bounties in areas like pretty seldomly, and they weren't even that crazy. When I heard people had like $100 bounties, it's like, all right, you're just committing mass murder. What are you doing?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I pretty much always
I
paid off my bounties as soon as I had them, and at those points I had like a ton of money, so it wasn't really a huge issue for
yeah.
me to just like go to the post office, pay my bounties, and then I was all set.
Yeah, early on, I just shot up Valentine for fun and had like a 300 something dollar bounty there. But then, like, after that, I kind of got that fulfilled for the game. So, like, after that, I never had a bounty that was too high.
Yeah, yeah. So just to continue on the story stuff. So basically, chapter 2 and 3, a lot of that is, your camp sort of moving around and the gang sort of working their way toward the south. Which brings us more to like chapter 4 when you head to Saint Denis, which I feel like is easily one of the best parts of the game. Is just like exploring that space, and because it feels so completely different from everything else at that point in the rest of the game.
Yeah. It's, I loved the sound of the horse on the stone. Like, that
Yeah,
sound
yeah.
effect. Yeah, as soon as I heard that, I was like, okay, I like this. Also, though, this is tangential, but I got my horse caught between poles in that city so often. Like I don't know how I did it, but like I get it lodged in like these weird spaces in the city
Yeah,
where it
yeah.
wasn't supposed to be, which I found funny. But yeah, Saint Denis was a really cool city. It was actually supposed to be called New Bordeaux.
Yeah, there
Uh,
was the whole thing because that like yeah they were supposed to call it New Bordeaux, but that's what they used for Mafia 3, so they had to like
so,
go and change everything and do all that.
so I found that kind of funny too because it was kind of swampy, like
Yeah.
that too. So it was actually surprisingly similar. But yeah, it was much bigger than like in the first game. Blackwater is like the big city you go
Yeah.
to. And so then in this one, for them to go like, oh no, it's even bigger.
Yeah,
Like
this
this
is
is an
like
actual city.
completely different, and especially
Yeah,
because I love the way that they introduced the city, which is like you and Dutch and I think a couple of people are riding into Saint Denis, and he's saying like, oh, this is like the future, and this is what civilization looks like, and it's just these like thick smokestacks, and it's just
yeah,
like it made a
It's
really
industry.
like yeah, it's industry. It's just like it was just made a really like sort of poignant moment where it was like especially like just like given the like the current state of the world and stuff like that, and seeing all this, and you're like, oh, this is like what we're becoming. Like,
oh yeah, definitely.
Right, and I think to go back to Cornwall again, it's like our fourth mention of the guy, but like he's a big part of that, right? Because he's like the guy that's bringing industry, so it's like I think going into Saint Denis, made me think of Cornwall even more. I was like, oh, maybe this is where this guy headquarters out of, like, and that's why that I think that killing of him got it even crazier. I don't know. Because it's the point of like, here's the industry that's going to kill the old west, right? Like you're looking at it now. You've been looking at this like lush landscape and these beautiful mountains. Here's what you have to look forward to.
yeah, I think that's definitely like why, especially like one of my favorite parts too was there's that mission when you go with John into like the cemetery area of Saint Denis, and like it's all like very murky. The lighting especially just like stood out in that way because like it's just so different from everything else in the rest of the game, where it's like you're shooting all these guys in this like murky cemetery with the lighting giving this really creepy eerie vibe, and it just like that really stood out to me as one of the things that I really enjoyed about this section of the game. I think it was just funny for me with Saint Denis, like they pull off what like 4 or 5 different robberies or things like that, and every time they
Yeah,
just wind up back in Saint Denis, and they're just like, oh, we're back here, like, and whereas like I feel like how they pull off like a bank heist, they pull off all these major robberies, and like they just keep going back there and robbing it again, like.
yeah, it was, and it does have like it's kind of like silly moments where it's like, all right, Dutch, you're getting a little too wild. Like,
Yeah,
it's a
especially
little,
with the event, like they
little
did
too much.
that. I think the riverboat thing was there too, right? When you're in the casino and you're robbing that, like,
Yes.
which was also really really cool. Like that was just an outstanding sequence too. Yeah. Any other thoughts that you guys have about Saint Denis and sort of what you like from that part of the
Well,
game?
not Saint Denis, but just to go back one, heading south, I loved that whole like plantation rivalry,
Oh yes, yes,
and I felt like, I mean, I know that that's what, like, looking, if you look them up online, like plantation homes look like that, but the Braithwaite Manor is sick, and that
Yeah.
mission
Oh
taking
yeah.
her out,
Hmm.
when Jack's missing, like this is right
Yeah.
before you go to Saint Denis.
right,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
like, this is just great. Like,
Yeah,
I
especially
was
like
like,
Yeah.
I got when there's that shot when it's the whole gang lined up and they're walking down the path toward the
Yeah.
mansion. Like I just
yeah,
got chills from seeing that. That was
Yeah.
just such a cool moment. Like
Hmm. Yeah, no,
that,
yeah, same. I think we all did. Yeah, it's just like it's very kind of generic cowboy moment kind of thing, but
yeah. It's like, let's go
it's
take care
so
of business
cool
right now.
because like it's one of the first times you see that whole ensemble going to do something together. So you just see like all of these cowboys walking down to get back the one thing they have hope for.
right,
So
yeah,
it was a really cool moment.
And
yeah.
I have to admit that I love like the way they play off like like those people's stupidity down there, and like they would dress up as cops, like with the town sheriff,
Oh
and
yeah,
like I thought it was just really hilarious that, like, I don't know, the way that Rockstar framed those characters. And they did it in like a way that, like, those characters didn't want to give up on their old ways, right? I never found like the KKK people down there, which I'm still looking for them,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they need to catch these hands. But outside of that, it was just really funny how like the people of Rhodes and that whole area just are very different. And like the West was dying, but like these people were like stuck in their ways.
Yeah.
And I like the way that Rockstar really did that. So, but we can go on to
yeah. I
another
think that
later
was a
chapter.
major theme though. What you just said. I think that's to the theme of the whole series. Kind of is people being stuck in their ways. Where you have like Dutch's gang who's stuck being cowboys even though you're dying. You have those families who have even just not even gotten past the Civil War and then you have like there's like a side mission you do with one guy who's a slave owner. Like the game makes it clear that that's like one of its main themes in a lot of the quests. That like the world's changing, but these people aren't willing to change with it.
Yeah, yeah. So now that we've discussed those chapters and stuff, let's move on to chapter 5, which is the Guarma section of the game, which I've tagged as when Red Dead Redemption 2 becomes Uncharted. Pretty much what I feel like that game. That section was really like, I think, another one that stood out just because it takes you away from the action. It's such a completely different type of environment where, like, you spent the whole game in these, like, western plains and cities and towns, and then you wind up in this like tropical paradise. So what did you guys think of the Guarma section?
I wasn't the biggest fan because it just kind of felt like padding for the most part. But it was a cool moment. I was just expecting it to be like a mission or so, but then they kind of drew it out for a little bit longer than I liked. It was ballsy of them to go like, "Oh yeah, by the way, we have this island you haven't heard about too." Like it was a cool kind of subverting expectations moment. But I found it kind of just to be a bit like kind of like padding to the plot where
I,
that they could have used elsewhere.
I got to agree a little bit. I do agree with you, Tomas, that it did feel like padding. Like it absolutely did. Um, the I don't know. It did add, like, it was more like a surprise. Like, whoa, I didn't think we were gonna get shipwrecked on an island like randomly. Like, so I thought it was a cool surprise. But yeah, I think it did add some padding that I don't think that I think if you pull out Guarma, I don't miss anything.
Yeah, I can agree in some ways. Like, but I think like Guarma was still like a cool, like it was an interesting set piece. But I think like I think if they took you away from it too soon, then that would have felt maybe like oh, why did we go all the way out here anyway? So
Yeah.
but I
Right.
think
Uh,
like but yeah, I can see where it's like, oh, maybe we spent too much time here.
Yeah,
Like,
I think they could have had him wash up like more towards Blackwater or something, and I think it would have had like the same kind of effect.
yeah, like
So
I think the vibe they were going for was that this was this game's Mexico, where it was meant to
yeah,
feel just like a completely different sort of like world and environment for for these
Right.
characters to get
yeah,
lost
Right.
in.
And it
but
did.
yeah, but you don't stay there. It's odd because it's like it's too long to feel like short, and then it's too short to feel like it was like substantial.
Yeah,
But
So
I think though the point of it happening, outside of all the other botched, scores and stuff like that, was to say like, dude, you're not getting out of this gang.
yeah, because basically this was supposed to be the island paradise that Dutch was trying to like bring them to, and yet this still wasn't. Like, they get there and they're immediately like being riled up by like the Cuban military and stuff like that, like all the people there. So they were just getting themselves in an even bigger jam.
yeah, I think it was just kind of beating the gang down to their lowest,
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So now I think let's move on towards chapter 6 and the ending of the game and what you guys sort of thought as we get back from Guarma, we wind up back in back in the areas we've been in the game, and we sort of lead toward the end. So what did you guys think of sort of how this game wraps up, at least the main story, before we get to the epilogue?
I really liked the endings. Chapter 6 I think was really great because it's kind of everything coming to a head. You finally that little time skip allows characters like Sadie to come into their own, and stuff's like starting to hit the fan. So it's kind of you're finally kind of seeing everything the game spent so much time building up like falling down. So I thought I really liked that last chapter, and then you start to see the roots of the first game. Like I know the epilogue does that further, but like you really start to see how it's kind of leading into the first Red Dead Redemption in that chapter, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I think the big set pieces or the big fights, it was so some of the stuff like looking back at it, like some of those missions are like classic Rockstar. So like going up against like the army out of nowhere, you're like, what?
Yeah.
How did we, and that happens. I think in like every GTA title, like towards the end, is like you get like the really ridiculous over the top missions, like hey, we're gonna go to a military base. You literally do in this one, right? That's like classic Rockstar, I think. But in terms of all the stuff that happens and the characters literally falling apart, that this is the peak game, right? And I think the way that it's handled is great. I think what was interesting too is just based on the original Red Dead. I thought that Marston was left for dead in a different way.
Yeah.
So the fact that he fell off that train, and that's when they quote unquote left him for dead. But then on top of that, Micah comes back and he's like, "Oh yeah, we lost John back there." It was like, what? Like, it was just very interesting how everything starts playing out. Because again, you keep thinking back to the original. I mean, if you played the original, you keep thinking back to that. You think like, when does this turn happen? And we talked about it a little bit earlier. And then when you realize that the turn is actually, Marston with John and saying like, you just got to go. You got to get your family, get the hell out of here. That was just that was great. And I think that the ending on the mountain, you know, and watching John kind of like just fall at that part was perfect. Because he did redeem himself. He didn't. He didn't
You mean
close out the
Arthur?
mission.
Arthur, you mean?
Arthur, yeah. So yeah, he does redeem himself as a person, even though he doesn't get the payoff he was looking for. But
Yeah, 'cause I
yeah.
don't. Did you guys get that scene with the nun at the train station?
I don't think so. No, not that I
Really?
remember.
Oh wow. Yeah. Okay. So that was a story cutscene that was influenced by a side quest I had done. I did this
Oh,
side quest
interesting.
where I met this Mexican nun, and she showed up at a train station, and I think after you send that army general, you kind of break out away.
Hmm.
As soon as he got on the train, this woman from a side quest came up to Arthur, and it was honestly one of my favorite scenes in the whole plot, where she's just like talking to him, and Arthur's like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna die," and then she's like, "Well, you need to help somebody, like find something you can do." And
Oh,
I
interesting.
thought it reflected the themes and of like redemption better than any other scene in the game. And to know that's just because I did a side quest, like that's crazy. Like what's the trigger in the plot for it to kind of know that? Like the other thing with when you collapse in Saint Denis with tuberculosis, like it's just there's some really cool story stuff like that where they seamlessly like throwing this like side stuff into it, and you're just kind of surprised at how well it like meshed together.
Yeah, and I think just for me, like that whole scene with the at the mountaintop when Arthur sort of redeems himself and he has the fight with Micah and everything like that. I loved that whole like how that scene played out. Out of curiosity, what choices did you guys make at the end where you helped John or you went after the money?
You helped John there. I don't know why you'd go after the
Yeah,
money.
yeah, yeah. No, I did the same thing too. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think apparently it just basically like Arthur dies no matter what, but I think it basically just changes how he dies. Is like either he gets left in the mountain and dies of his tuberculosis, or I think the other option, I think Micah kills him. I think is basically how that plays out from what I
Yeah,
read. Yeah, I think it's if you choose that, then Micah like stabs him and kills him.
or no, I think that's honor based. Like if you,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I don't know because I didn't go for the money. But yeah, you probably just died somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
I know you get the key. I guess I have to go back in the epilogue now. Well, not finish the epilogue, but I'm saying like in the end game. I got to go back with that key and go back to that mountain.
Oh, and get the money. Yeah.
I guess I can still go get that. Yeah, let me go. I'm gonna go do that.
Yeah, you should go. It's a lot.
Kidding.
So all right, so now I think we've touched on that. Let's dive into the epilogue, or at least try to without spoiling Tomas too much. So, so basically, after the ending of the game, you jump into the role of John Marston, taking over for the epilogue of the game. And it's interesting how the epilogue, like, because as we said before, it basically sort of bridges the gap between Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Redemption 1. And like in a lot of ways it felt very similar to the epilogue of the original game where in the original game you played as Jack and you went after the you went after the guys that killed John, but like there were the whole sections of the game where you were just trying to ranch and sort of live a normal life, and this was that but like really expanded, and I thought that was cool, just like after having gone through the 50 or 60 hours or so of just like bloodshed and heists and doing all this stuff, it was nice to just sort of slow down the game a little bit. And I think that helped that transition from the ending of the game to the epilogue.
I think building that house was my favorite sequence. I was like, I'm building a family for my house. And
That was great. Yeah. The scene where you're building the house
Isn't it like
is
a music
awesome.
video almost? I've seen it described as.
Basically, yeah, it's more or less because all you do is really just like you watch as they build the house and there are like button prompts to do all the things, but like it really does kind of feel more like a music video.
That's funny.
Yeah. And yeah, like I said before, there's the scene with like Abigail and John when they go into town, and he's trying to propose to her basically. And yeah, there a lot of those moments like that I think were really landed for me in the epilogue, almost more than like because there are some cool set piece moments in the epilogue too, like as far as action stuff. But really, I think just those smaller like slice of life type of things that they were doing in the epilogue were really like what made that section stand out to me. Joel, since you finished it, you can go ahead and talk about it
Yeah,
too.
I mean, did you think that I when I was playing it, I thought I don't know, somewhere along the lines, I was like, oh well, I know what's gonna happen. I was like, I'm gonna get arrested, and this is where the whole working for the government thing kind of starts. But that never came. So I thought like after the date happened, like something really wild was gonna go on, or we were gonna get Micah, and then I was gonna get arrested, and then that literally sets off the moments at the beginning of Red Dead. But that never happens.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought the epilogue was great, honestly. And there's a scene in the epilogue. I don't know if you caught this. When you're in the barn and you're fighting that guy away from the farm, and you take the double barrel shotgun out. That's actually that's the box cover to Red Dead One.
Oh no, I saw that. That was great. Yeah, where they made that allusion.
Oh,
to,
you do that? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh shit, this
When
is
he's
great.
holding the
The
shotgun.
double
Yeah.
barrel shotgun. You have the farming gloves on. I was like, it's the cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to put that on top of the moment with the hat, I was like, this is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to think what else. I think the other thing too that's cool about the epilogue is the fact that obviously there's a time jump, but I think it's like 7 years I think after the end of Red Dead 2, something like that.
Jack is like a teenager, like a preteen.
Yeah, yeah, and you catch back up with like Sadie and Charles, and like I think that was really interesting to see like where they've been in that time since the end of the main game. So you see Charles is like a prize. He's doing brawls in Saint Denis, and then you see Sadie sort of making a name for himself as like a bounty hunter out in the wilds. I think it was cool to sort of see those characters like and catching up with them, and then they're talking about, oh, I haven't seen Micah in years, and like I've heard whispers that Dutch is around, like that sort of more immersive storytelling that it offers, and the catching up with these characters after so long. Yeah, Tomas, do you have anything? I know you didn't finish the epilogue, but if you have anything you kind of want to say from what you've played of it so far.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. I think basically everything you guys have said has been true about it. It's cool that there's basically another game stapled onto it afterwards, but it's just impressive, adds to the scope, bridges the gap between the two games nicely. They could have just been a cutscene bridging them, but they decided to make it like a multiple hour section.
Yeah, and I think that's it's when you get to the payoff of the epilogue, you're just like, ah, man, this was good. Like, it's really, really, really good, and I can't wait till Tomas gets to that piece.
Yeah, yeah.
And in terms of, I guess, with that said, we can go into what we hope to see from them going from here, right? Or like, is that?
Yeah. Like we can talk about that now. We've covered everything else. So like, what do you hope with what Rockstar has done with Red Dead Redemption 2? Like, where do you think they go from here? Whether that's as a studio or if they obviously they'll probably continue this franchise and do a new game. So what do you guys think will come from Red Dead Redemption 2?
If they were going to do a third game in the series, I think they could end here. But if they wanted to do another Western, I'd go way earlier and make Dutch the main character. You play as Dutch, and you kind of see his origins, because that's one thing we still don't know a lot about. So it'd be interesting to kind of see him meeting Hosea. So it'd be kind of weird because the series would be basically working backwards. But I think that would be interesting for a future entry.
And young Arthur.
Yeah. Kind of see how he came across Arthur and John. So you see them as kind of almost kind of like Jack's age in the epilogue. Like they're kind of there. So I think if they were going to do another Western, like Red Dead Redemption sequel, they can really only go back with like what they've covered.
Right.
So
yeah.
I think that'd be the most interesting. Either go with like a completely new set of characters, or like go farther back and make it like Dutch the main character. Other than that though, like I'd honestly, I forgot who brought it up on our staff, but someone said that they should do like a 1920s like game with during
Oh
Prohibition and
yeah,
all that.
as we
Kinda,
I know a couple
yeah,
people said it. So basically, we want Boardwalk Empire, the game, pretty
yeah,
much is
basically,
like.
yeah.
I mean, we want Rockstar to make it. No one
Yeah,
else.
kind of in between LA Noire and Red Dead Redemption 2 somewhere.
So I honestly like after finishing this and seeing like the world that they built. By the way, Mexico is in the game, Ryan. People found it.
Well, yeah. So I was talking with Tomas about that. So there are like it is technically in the game. Like you
Yeah.
can't access it normally, but people have
Right, right.
like glitched their way to get into there.
Yeah. So I'm hoping. I mean, this is a long shot in the dark, but they have all the audio, they have the story laid out, they have everything from the original Red Dead. Why can't they just make it like a $40 add-on and just throw that story right into this with this engine? And
You know how expensive that'd be.
I know, I know. Well, I'm just like,
Yeah, but this is also Rockstar, who basically
I
has
know.
infinite money, pretty much.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah, and
Yeah.
they, and it's funny because if you look up on YouTube, like you can look up a video that has like every single Rockstar, every single Red Dead cutscene. The video's only like 49 minutes long. So it's like they'd have to technically shoot 49 minutes worth of cutscene, again, and just use the same voiceover from the original, and it would work. But yeah, I don't know. I just with seeing this world, I was like, man, it'd be great if they re-released the original in this engine, which they won't. But yeah, I guess in terms of what I would want to see, I'm in agreement with the rest of the staff to do like a Boardwalk Empire kind of Prohibition era thing. That would
Yeah.
be ideal. Rockstar like next project, and again like LA Noire, base it in a real city because I know if they do it in a real city, they'll do it right, just like LA Noire.
Yeah, I think overall like I think like I'm really, based on how they, this game really kind of takes everything that worked about Red Dead and really like, and this is something I've been trying to write into an editorial, but really kind of take everything Rockstar has done in their previous games and just kind of like amp it up to 11, because there's a lot of aspects of their previous games in here, like, the more sim elements that I think that they tried to do in GTA San Andreas that are here, that they've sort of dialed up and refined, and the combat mechanics and everything like that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they try to expand on the ways that they've tried to make this world feel so much more, alive and detailed and dynamic and immersive. So, I think story-wise, I think it would make sense that if they did do a third game, that they would probably have to move further back in the timeline, which would be interesting. But I guess also bring it more in line with the fact that this is like the peak of the Wild West versus these two games, which kind of covered the end of the Wild West. So that might be interesting to sort of see a life that's a little more untamed. But yeah, I think Red Dead 2 is clearly like a huge achievement for Rockstar, and I'd be interested to see where they go from here with this game.
Too bad we won't see it for another 5-6 years. So
Oh, we won't. Yeah, we won't see it for another decade, but it'll be interesting on PS5 and Xbox Two. When those come out.
on the tail end of those.
Yeah, basically. All right, cool. Let's. Anyone else have anything before we wrap up here that they want to say?
No, I'm good. I want to get back to hunting.
Okay.
I'm
All
good.
right. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So that's pretty much it for our spoiler cast. So thanks everyone for listening. Just to plug a couple quick things as we wrap up here. Obviously, there's our review of the game, which I wrote, and we gave the game a 10, which is not many games get that score on our site, which is obviously very deserving of that score, I feel. Aside from the things that we talked about today that sort of critique and get in more detail. A couple other editorials and things you could find. I wrote a tips and tricks guide, just some of the things if you're just starting out in the game. Tomas wrote, except for Halo Master Chief Collection, which that's a dig at Joel for for doing that. I wrote a tips and tricks guide, which is some tips for starting out in the game. Logan and Michael both wrote some great editorials, just talking about their feeling about the game's pace and length. Joel also did his piece about sort of the story and the characters and how he feels like the relationships of those characters makes for one of the best parts of the game. And then Ben also wrote a really cool tip about taking in-game photos if you'd like to do that. So thanks everyone for listening to our Red Dead Spoilercast. If you haven't finished the game yet and listened to this, I don't know why, but I hope you go enjoy the rest of it now that it's been spoiled for you. And as always, you can follow us on the site at DualShockers.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as DualShockers. You can follow us on YouTube at DSTV Originals, and wherever else you can find us that I can't remember off the top of my head. So thanks everyone for joining us, and go enjoy your time out in the Wild West. Bye.
Bye now.